Welcome to ET Catalyse. Our lens today is on the millennial code. We have with us Naveen from MTV, Divya from Alt Balaji, Ankur from Grofers, and Angad from India Times Lifestyle Network. Welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us for ET Catalyse. Let's start with Divya. Divya, how do you go about tailor marketing your strategy for the millennial?
It's a very interesting question. So for us, being a content app, and content is one of the most, I would say, near to the heart, engaging piece of product that you can find on the digital. It's very, very important that we appeal to the millennials who currently are living a digital life, right? Of course, because we are a digital product, we emphasize a lot on the intelligence that we gather from the research that we do, from the marketing campaigns that we do at a digital and the segmented level. But as a marketer, I have always felt that it is up to us to interpret that data and of course apply a little bit of gut feel on top of it. And till date, it has worked very well for us. So I would say it's almost about 70% of data mapping and about 30% of the gut, because for us, content is a highly engaging product and you have to apply those sensibilities as well.
Naveen, if I can take from there, so there is data, there is study, and then there is gut. How does it work in your category when you go about planning your strategy?
Yeah, see, what we've got the benefit of is MTV does a youth insight study, and it's been doing that for the last 2 decades. So when I inherit this whole database and I do the next 2 phases of this that I do, I can actually map out, let's say, a concern point in people's life and see how it has moved over the years. Because you're always polling the young, for us, which would currently qualify as Gen Z. So 15 to 25-year-old, I'll give an example. So let's say around 15 years back, when the question was asked to try and find the correlation between money and happiness from the perception of a young person, 92% people said, if I have money, I will be happy. Our last edition, where we did the work around a year back, only around 52% said, if I have money, I will be happy. It does not mean that youngsters now are saying, I don't want money. All they're saying is that if I have money, maybe that's catering to a small part of what I want, but there's so much more to life.
They've understood pretty early money doesn't buy you happiness,
Yeah,
which took so many years for Gen X to understand.
For us, so maybe for the millennial, it took a long time to figure this out. But for a Gen Z kid today, they want to do everything, and money is not finally the only thing that matters. So for us, the crux or the base on which we sort of function is really a youth insight study. And we could take that into new shows, or we could take it into our marketing programs.
But how does your content, cater to the huge age bracket that you have, which is like 23 to 38-year-old, which is the millennial today? Or do you actually segment it and restrict to a certain bracket or a certain psychographics?
Yeah, so our programming TG we've defined as different from our consumption TG. We see our programming core TG as 15 to 21-year-olds, or at best 15 to 25.
Very much Gen Z.
Yeah, very much Gen Z. But what you do get is either a millennial who used to watch MTV earlier who stayed on, or maybe some millennials who are young at heart and still consume. But the programming TG for which we eke out insights is usually Gen Z.
But do you want to hold on to the TG that grew on MTV via satellite and would now have moved to an OTT play? Are you planning to hold on to them, or you're okay to lose and keep the Gen Z in place?
See, right now we have no offering in the market that helps us hold on to them. It is surely the brand power that lets or makes some of them hang on to the content and still consume it. But hopefully a roadmap, which I can't share too much on, maybe at some point in time we'll be able to break out of being, let's say, a single dimensional piece and maybe cater to young at heart rather than only a demographically young TG.
Angad, how does it work in your segment? You're predominantly online, and when you are targeting your programs and your content to them, how do you? Is it only a digital play, or you use a multimedia marketing mix?
No, for us it's only digital, and these are brands which have been built on digital as well. I think the core insight which broadly sums up our entire strategy is that millennials are I read this quote somewhere, which is essentially that people were born in communities. Say Gen X that you mentioned, we were born in communities and we had to venture out to discover our own individuality. And I think that's been sort of one common trait of this sort of millennials. If you compare it to Gen Z, however, people are born individuals. What they seek is individuality. And since our programming is based on sort of, it's a Gen Z focused brands that I help run, all of our programming is essentially designed to be just sort of conduit of connection to create this community. So if you look at our programming like the South Delhi Girls or Honest Reviews by Men's XP, these are programs which are essentially creating a sense of community by just stimulating the audience to create a canvas of conversation. And that's sort of the core insight with which we've built most of our editorial strategies.
So your target is to build a community, but how do you go about selling that feeling or selling a community approach? Or do you need to?
I think brands today understand that they want to achieve two objectives. One, they want to be a part of the conversation. I think being a part of cultural conversations is at the heart of several strategies, right? If you're a marketer, you want to be a part of the cultural conversation, right? The entire meme culture is based on this sort of trend. I think there are two sets of marketers which we sort of target to. One are performance oriented, who have a very well defined, clear cut marketing objective, who are going to attribute their sort of spends to a very well defined outcome. What's been fascinating to see that the same marketeers now have metrics to define them being part of cultural conversations, which are interactions or engagement and so on and so forth. So these are essentially the two marketeers that we sort of work with.
Divya, if I can come to you, you're up against the big daddies who have endless bags of money to spend. You have to be wise, you have to be smart, you have to be ROI driven when it comes to marketing and spends.
Correct.
What really has worked for you?
Okay, so let me just put another perspective onto this. So the big daddies like Netflix and Amazon, if I may name them, also give 1 month subscription free, right? While we as a platform don't do anything like that.
You want the money up front.
We want the money up front, right? As a business proposition. So it's not been easy, I'll be honest with you, because of course the fact that here's somebody with bagfuls of money which is never ending. Their content production cost itself is multiple times over what we spend. Their marketing spends are multiple times over. And of course, their overall library offerings are also bigger, right? So it's been a challenge from 3 point of views that we've been facing as a business. The approach that we took, and I can say a very clear strategic approach we took about 1.5 years ago when I joined the business and I was advised, to firm a brand and create a revenue opportunity was that we said, let's first find a niche. What are we going to do? Because with such big players in the market, you can't be everything and anything. So we decided that we are working fine, and that's where we have an expertise, is Hindi original space. So what we said is we are going to stand as leaders of Hindi original space. Today we have almost 53 Hindi originals, which nobody in the market really has, right? So we have stuck true to the product delivery promise. The second part that we work towards is very sharp business operations, right? So whether it's marketing, whether it's cost of production, et cetera, et cetera. So that has worked beautifully well for us. The third thing then we started working towards were changing all the marketing matrix. So where we decided that no longer are views going to be your marketing matrix. So no longer will there any buying happening basis CPV and CPM, and those are all obsolete. Now somebody will say, you're setting very high targets for your own team and yourself, but that's a challenge we took. And therefore for us today, any metric that is worth considering as a SVOD platform is CPS, cost per subscriber. Has this made my job difficult? Very difficult. And I wear two hats. One is of marketing, the other is of direct revenue. So it's even tighter rope walk for me because every penny that I'm spending, I'm also checking in hindsight that is it getting me at least double the revenue, right? But in a way, it has given team and us and the business a very clear roadmap, a very well-balanced approach to the P&L also. And I think what's worked, like I said, is that very clear goal in mind, saying CPS and how am I building my brand along the way using the content library that we have. So at any point of time, we're constantly working on the new show, the new content, the segmentation, the CPS, and how are we leveraging our library well and monetizing it?
So content and the library is what matters. In your segment and for MTV, Naveen, is content the only play? Is content the hero that you build your narrative around and your marketing plan around? Or is there anything else that you have figured out as a lever to first appeal the brand? Or does show become the hero?
Two things. One is I wanted to touch upon the earlier point. I think one risk in this market is that Netflix has higher than fair share of mind space. It might have 2 million paying subscribers in a country of 1.25 billion. But the unfortunate truth is that that 2 million subsumes all the 50,000 marketeers who run the budgets. And in that sense, while I'm not saying marketeers are not smart, it's easy to get carried away or swayed with the larger conversation. India will continue to be an AWOD dominated market. There was a report put out by Boston Consulting Group which said that while it will grow by leaps and bounds content, it's still likely to be 60-40 in favor of AWOD. And that's because the propensity of the Indian customer to really pay for anything including content is likely to be low in the times to come. And given the kind of slowdown that we are seeing, it's likely to be hit even more. One other factor that seems to have worked in the favor of content right now is, I don't know whether enough credit is given to Jio, which is this market had an average rate of buying 1 GB of data of 255 rupees, which Jio crashed to 19 rupees. So it's brought down the rates to 10% of what they were, and maybe even lower if you buy a 3-month plan and so on. So that's one massive thing. And that has led to the average consumption by one individual to go from 700 MB to 12 GB. That's massive. So India is the highest consumer of data and become the lowest cost consumer. Now with the prices going up, it will be interesting to see how content plays out. In the case of MTV, like I was referring to earlier, two things we've seen. One is that if content works with people, it will work whether you run it on TV or on OTT. So Voot right now, which is the Viacom 18 OTT platform, has now got 100 million users monthly as of last month, right? And other than Big Boss, most of the top shows continue to be MTV shows, which do well on TV and which do well on OTT as well. So that's one big chunk that ticks boxes for us, which tells us that good content will work on any platform. To your question, beyond content, what we do is, all our brand equity studies show us that the core of this brand is being the voice of youth. And that is not limited to reality shows or fiction shows or small format or long format. So what we tend to do is we pick up things sometimes which are serious and sometimes things which are fun. So for example, our youth study showed us that trash or plastic was a big area of concern for youngsters. But we didn't want to go out and preach that, let's clean up trash and things like that. So what we said was, listen, we're getting a lot of trash online because young kids, they come online, there's nobody monitoring, they come and trash you or your actors or sometimes your shows.
So you use the concern or cause marketing approach, did you?
Yeah. I'll show you two different flavors of that. So one was we said, no problem, keep the hate coming in because for each trashy comment that you put in, we will go out and clean 1 kg of trash. And so over the period of this, some 12,000 kilos of trash we collected. And then we used that trash to build on Dussehra a plastic Ravan to share the message that plastic is the new Ravan. And that sort of completed a loop. Nothing to do with any of our shows, just a way of sort of keeping conversation on, being relevant, being culturally relevant, doing what young kids want. The other was a cause which was possibly not in the serious zone, where we said India loves biryani. Biryani is more than food, it's an emotion. All the food apps keep sharing data on how biryani is the highest ordered per minute, per month, per year, and so on. And so we realized what's the young person's context. The young person's using chat apps to talk a lot and using all sorts of emoticons. And then we realized that, hey, there's no emoticon for biryani. There's an emoticon for chicken, there's an emoticon for rice, there's an emoticon for everything, but there's no emoticon for biryani.
But how did you connect brand MTV with it?
Yeah, so the voice of youth is when you say something that young people get behind. So when we started this cause, we got around 100,000 signatures online on change.org. There's no money spent in this. It's just a cause that young people rallied around. We took out a street march in DU and we got around 800 kids. We just put up posters in their college canteens. We got 800 kids who rallied behind this cause. Lots of media outlets landed up there and carried away. To me, these are important things to do because if your brand is nothing more than your show, because each show has a brand, is a brand in itself. And your brand has to be bigger and has to have a relevant conversation continuously rather than saying, hey, मेरा नया show आ गया, इसको देख लो.
So you mixed online and then took it offline and then put the entire message and wove around it.
So one, for example, millennials lived through the transition between offline and online. So what that meant was there's a certain amount of appreciation for the old world versus the new world, which would not happen with the Gen Z because the Gen Z was born into the new world, digital and content first. Millennials tend to be single career focused and stability focused. Gen Z are clear that they want to do multiple things in one life. Maybe one life is too little to lead for just one career or one objective.
They're ready to experiment.
Absolutely. They need to. They think that's the fundamental. And they don't feel this like millennials do at the age of 40, 45, saying, okay, is there something else I should have done earlier and so on. But they feel this right from the get-go, from the 20s.
Ankur, if I can come to you, is there a difference between how you market a tier 1 audience versus a tier 2 audience? I mean, you're spread across multiple cities. Do you see consumption patterns or habits different and thereby your strategy will have to be different to appeal to them?
Yes, of course. So, for example, a key source of growth right now continues to be supermarkets. Now, in areas where there are no supermarkets, you can't go with the same proposition. The biggest difference that we see, and this is predominantly from the calling that we do, internal calling that we do to customers, is that our source of growth becomes much bigger from kirana stores when it comes to smaller towns as compared to supermarket stores in the bigger 13 cities. So that there is a clear differentiation. The one surprising thing that has come out is that there is this affinity to get things home delivered, that it's एक नई चीज़ है, you know, and therefore you want to, and that convenience we never played on, right?
It gives them the thrill.
It gives them the thrill.
It lands up.
Absolutely, and it's a proposition we never communicated. It's a proposition we don't want to stand for, but we often get it in research as one of the key points of why they chose to go, chose to buy from grocers is because it gets things home delivered.
So they value that service?
They value that service, while it was not what we intended to do. So coming back to your question, the fundamental difference, of course, becomes the source. From supermarket, it becomes kirana. We have also seen that unlike bigger cities where a lot of the demand is skewed towards the weekends, the demand in newer cities, because people have slightly more time, is slightly more stable towards weekdays as well. So the demand is slightly more equal in terms of its proportion as compared to the bigger cities where it's skewed towards weekends. So these two we definitely see. The other third trend I think I would say is that there is a slightly higher male skew that we see in the expansion cities, in the new cities, as compared to being slightly more gender neutral in the bigger cities.
Angad, I want to understand the role of influencer marketing. With South Delhi Girls, you created virtual brands and they had huge power and influence. But how responsible you have to be when you're using the influencer marketing method?
I think, so I'll answer that in two parts. One is the role of influencer and how they're potentially small/large media enterprises in their own right. And second is, I think you asked me a question which is about being, broadly put, about being woke, about being a little more conscious about the word that you're putting out there. I think much like media organizations, you have an audience which is built on a philosophy, which is built on what you stand for. And I think that plays out in the same way with influencers. If you choose to provocate a certain ideology, you will have a certain audience for it. Typically, the ones that we associate with are the ones which are a little more progressive, which nudge the, let's just say, broadly put society in the right direction. Coming back to being media companies in their own right, I think a lot of companies are now platform agnostic. Influence is being built not just by media organizations but by individuals as well. And I think it's one of the fastest growing sort of media categories, both in terms of spends by marketeers and in terms of reach. And I think what's happening in India right now is that it's almost at a tipping point of this trend, wherein I think we were discussing earlier that the consumption habits in the country are mirroring that of China. not getting into the transactional habits, but newer platforms are being more readily accepted. People are building more audiences much faster than traditional organizations. And I think that's a very, very exciting time for the industry because it's really changing the dynamics of at least marketing driven by cultural nuances and sort of cultural influences.
I mean, you experience a lot with Gen Z. Is the Gen Z very different than the millennial?
Well, yes, across a variety of attributes. Let me take 4 or 5 what I can remember. So one, for example, millennials lived through the transition between offline and online. So what that meant was there's a certain amount of appreciation for the old world versus the new world, which would not happen with the Gen Z because the Gen Z was born into the new world, digital and content first. Millennials tend to be single career focused and stability focused. Gen Z are clear that they want to do multiple things in one life. Maybe one life is too little to lead for just one career or one objective.
They're ready to experiment.
Absolutely. They need to. They think that's the fundamental. And they don't feel this like millennials do at the age of 40, 45, saying, okay, is there something else I should have done earlier and so on. But they feel this right from the get-go, from the 20s. So there are lots of parameters on which Gen Z are different, definitely. One big one is that also because internet and media proliferation wasn't so much, the millennials, let's say between the urban and upcountry, the content would flow in lag. Like a popular song or a popular movie in an urban area would trickle down upcountry much, much later. So if you went upcountry, you might hear a song in a barber shop that's actually 10, 12 years old because the pace at which things are trickling down to the remotest corners is very slow. But that has been just flattened by Geo and the internet for Gen Z.
I believe that I think it has become so democratized and it's become so set up that there is a fundamental mistrust that you have with when an influencer or a big name is just blurting out saying, okay, why don't you try this product?
It doesn't work for your category.
It
Grocery is very clearly so internalized and personalized through experiences that people trust their own selves.
Though I'll still say that we do it. I still say we do it, but I think it is one of those things, one of those mysteries that I'm still trying to grapple with. But yeah, I personally I'm not a big fan of it.
Divya, what's been your experience with appealing to Gen Z? Is it very difficult? Are they too wise and tough to crack, or they are ruled by the heart?
So, there was a point which you guys made earlier about influencer marketing. I would say Gen Z has got its head on its shoulders. They're wise. They know what they want. And I would know that because I have quite a few of them also, in their first jobs or second jobs working as part of my team. So most of I would say a lot of our inspiration on marketing also comes from how they think, how they react to situations like that. But I think they're wise, they're smart, they don't get easily influenced. However, they also look up to a certain creed, and that's where influencer marketing has helped us a lot. Today, it's not just influencer marketing to the fact of, let's say, creating an IDVA as a platform. It's also micro-influencers who are coming into play, right? So, for example, a Gen Z might be very, very interested in two similar sort of a product. So, she or he might love cooking along with fashion. Now, those are the areas where these micro-influencers on our shows come into play. And we have experienced this when we wanted to, suppose, crack a product like a punch beat, right? Which was absolutely targeted at Gen Z crowd, which is your college going as well as your first jobbers, because it has all the elements, right? We found that we could crack it beautifully through utilizing certain cast of the show who were big influencers on their way. Over and above that, then we got into this micro-influencers platform with them, right? So we took the various aspects of the show, so whether it be fashion that we showed, and then we listed out those, that were popular with the Gen Z, and we worked with them. And henceforth, or maybe even working with dance influencers, so these are the kind of things that work beautifully well with Gen Z. But I can say one thing for sure, that they know what they want. Of course, any product which they don't find trustworthy or worth their time will not work. And marketing can only do so much. So the product delivery has to be very strong because they are very clear in their mind what they want. And that's how we've cracked it.
Ankur, do you plan to appeal to the Gen Z because that's the next set of audience that will come and consume, or are they already on your platform?
No, I think that's not the TG that we would be gunning for. I think we are very clear in who we want to go for. I think it's a monthly household basket, so it will predominantly be around a female who's in the age group of 25 to 35, which is our consumption TG, and of course the media TG being broader. So we will continue to look at 22 to 40 as the age group, which would be quite relevant for the grocery buying that needs to happen in the house.
And does influencer marketing appeal to that TG that you cater?
I'll be very honest, we have done influencer marketing, but I've personally not been a very big fan of it. I think there are two reasons for it. One, I think there is fundamentally a point of reach. I think when you get a certain scale, then how much does it really incrementally add? And secondly, I believe that I think it has become so democratized and it's become so set up that there is a fundamental mistrust that you have with when an influencer or a big name is just blurting out saying, okay, why don't you try this product?
It doesn't work for your category.
It
Grocery is very clearly so internalized and personalized through experiences that people trust their own selves
Though I'll still say that we do it. I still say we do it, but I think it is one of those things, one of those mysteries that I'm still trying to grapple with. But yeah, I personally I'm not a big fan of it.
Right. Angad, is it easier to appeal to a millennial versus a Gen Z?
I think Gen Z as an audience set is driven by authenticity and honesty. If you look at the entire influencer phenomenon that is being played out in India, let alone India, globally, it's driven by authenticity. I think, broadly put, this is the Gen Z audience they're the children of liberalization. So they obviously grew up in a very, very different world than potentially, some of us did, or most of us did. And I think that's brought on a very different worldview. And that worldview is driven by access, is driven by abundance. Hence, sifting through that world requires a very, very different approach. And that approach is driven by honesty. I think millennials, in terms of at least let's say their consumption habits, tend to be a little more transactional. We are not swayed so much by recommendation of a third person versus our own peer groups. Our influencers were our own peer groups, were our friends and so on and so forth. But I think for Gen Z, it's the influencers who are the sort of the recommendation engines or the peer groups of sorts.
Naveen, when you talk to your counterparts in the US and other geographies, is there a difference between a global millennial versus an Indian millennial?
Yeah, we've had this chat possibly, and I think fundamentally there was one difference that we sort of agreed on, which is in the Western markets, they have seen genuine huge recessions, right? And in the voice of my counterparts there, they believe that that has been a big influencing factor on the outlook of the millennial there. India, to be honest, has not seen a real Great Depression or a Great Recession. Even the 2008 financial crisis and so on bypassed India because India is a consumption and demand driven market. So government spending and consumption is pretty much what drives a large part of it. So that we agreed is the fundamental difference, where the millennial there tended to believe that I need more savings and I need to save on costs and I need to be more value driven because of the recession having hit them and them having seen large scale unemployment and so on. Whereas the millennial in India is actually somebody who's seen great economic growth. So the Indian millennial is more positive in outlook compared to the global millennial.
That's a positive outlook for Indian millennial.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. From Gen Z to millennial to Gen X and going up to the baby boomers, everyone has a mind of its own. The tough nut to crack is the millennial mind, because that has witnessed a huge set of changes from the year 2001, 2020 that we are in today. It's important to understand what they consume, how they function, and what they really believe in. That's what we learned today. Thanks for watching ET Catalyse, and wait for our next episode. It has something else on its own mind.